The original idea was simply to do a minimal amount of work to the existing shed, and that the shed was a useful object. It was ugly, and that we'd always be struggling to make something out of it. And so, the approach was a really casual approach to let's make something out of nothing. The orientation of the site are probably okay. But as the architect, I was kind of thinking, everything's on for the house up here, and so it was, start this in a kind of a relaxed way and just see what happened. But then dividing this project into two parts, it's kind of pretty obvious, is that this was like an advertisement for the architecture of what that might be. And so it was do the most simplest thing you can do on this, and then do something really funky here, And so we got off onto this, or I did, in this almost quite impractical start. Like it was sort of, well, that makes no sense at all to do a kind of a bathhouse like that, that's attached to a sort of a shed and an open space. And that was a result of the process. So I can't say that's good or bad. It's just, it makes it, a kind of a ridiculous. It's a folly. For me, that has become a folly. We're silent. Oh, yeah. But we know that. That's the truth of it. So building that model, was just my way of communicating to the client. Yeah. For me to even do it.
Yeah. So to get Drew to come and build me a shed, I allowed.
Well, that's true. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't do it. I would just go, oh yeah, no, I'm just not interested. I mean, I probably still would have done it, but that's what kind of got me excited about it. And so then everything in the shed just becomes, and most of my architecture is just a whole series of rational decisions. That's the way I see it. And so, which side of the room's going to go on? Let's try and not do a corridor. Let's try and use the shed as a kind of big space. What side's the kitchen going to go on? Where will the living spaces be? Where will the doors be? Once you're on site, and I spend most of my time designing from site, all those things are so obvious, you just wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, there might be another solution, but that would require some other big conceptual move. And I generally don't do those kind of conceptual moves on sort of smaller scale projects that I haven't kind of prepared myself to do something conceptual. And that's a failing of my own practice, is that I just kind of wander into projects sometimes and just don't take them that seriously, and you end up kind of making a whole series of rational decisions, and then you kind of finish the project and you think, gee, I wonder if really I should have kind of sat back a bit further and made a bigger architectural move that wouldn't have left me in a kind of a position where it becomes a kind of an obvious solution. And I say that because I like the surprise of architecture, its ability to surprise people, and to turn kind of people's understanding of what a space might do or what it is upside down. Because I think people really enjoy those kind of things. You enjoy those kind of new types of spaces, which I'd love to talk about later, because I particularly like new spaces, or spaces that don't, have not been together before. And I was talking to a friend the other day, and it was about he builds choppers, motorcycle choppers, but for a long time it was his bedroom, and so his kind of double bed was there, and then the first chopper on a stand is here, that's just the frame, and there are another 5 choppers in a row, and the last one's finished. And then there's a wood fire at the other end, and then there's a walk-in wardrobe kind of, and then it turns into a bit of a kitchen, and then it turns into a lathe, and then it turns into back into a library where the fireplace is. And it's just such a fabulous kind of space, and I always have in the back of my mind of, how can we kind of reinvent some spaces and get other uses that kind of otherwise might not go into it. So in a project like this, it's different to another project I might be doing, where I've thought about it for 3 to 6 months, come up with a written concept. So that would be normally my process, is even before the model, I'd write something down. And so, and I could kind of describe it here, and I have, but this is not a strong architectural conceptual building in a sense. It's like shed, rooms, living space, bathhouse, having a dialogue over there. And we've got a flat platform, which makes life pretty easy, facing north. So it's a pretty simple program. So that's kind of, that sort of describes the structure of it. I'm always really, not always, but I'm really always looking for the fittest economical structure as possible. So, and suited to the trades and skills that I have, that people I know are working on the job. And this sort of post and beam stuff is so economical, so fast to build, so minimal on materials, gives you the possibility also, which is very important to me, is having every wall open so that there are no windows or doors. And so I try and get to a position where the structure stands alone with its roof that gives shelter, which obviously you need. And then anything else that goes in it could be interchangeable. So it might be a sliding door, it might be a wall, it might be a door. It could be anything, it could be a piece of joinery. And so that's really typical of here, where the whole frame that goes around here is completely open. So there's probably the most minimal amount of structure to support the roof and to brace the building. This is a bit more complex, but if you took away all the doors, structurally all there is the toilet that has a really heavy steel frame in it, and 2 columns either side. And then everything else is left open to play with. So this is that's the sophisticated version of this. And if you looked at most of my work, you'd kind of find that there would be an overriding structure, a roof of some, expressive nature that might relate to landform, to light, or a sense of internal space. And then I start filling things in, and the detail just tends to grow and grow and grow. And this is where part of my PhD stuff is about just getting into kind of the sort of the multi layers of possible detail at different scale that make up like a whole whole sort of world of architecture. And so you'll see in some of when we start getting into the sliding screens there, they've got all these kind of fine battens. That might be, level 4 out of 10 detail, and there might be, 4 more levels to go to get to, the insert inside a door handle, inside that and what its shadow might be. And that's kind of where, all of my work is generally headed. So my fascination is with, I see the architecture as something really quite simple, a model that I might try and make or a whole scheme I might try and make in 24 hours. And I've kind of gone off that a little bit. Like I used to have it as a bit of a sort of, this is how I'm going to practice architecture. I'm going to write something about it. I'm going to wait 3 months. Then I'm going to do the whole design and everything in 24 hours. So that's all fresh and sort of, for me, it's kind of consistent and stays together as one idea. And then the rest is all about the construction and detail. I'm trying to think more about, architecture before rushing into construction. But then, I kind of like also these just snap moments of, oh, here's the model, it's kind of made. I've made these decisions. Let's just go away and build it, So I'm less.
But when you're doing that, like you're anticipating. So what you're calling the architecture is kind of that model stage, isn't it? It's like it's the organisation of rooms.
It's what you've taught me. So architecture is what I learned at uni. And so everything else I do, like you did.
I'd like to unpack that for a little while.
Everything else is stuff from my past and from my experiences and from my kind of urges of exploration of my world in client landscape architecture materials.
But you would think though that if you gave that model to someone else, like you'd put the model for Simon, and then whatever reason you couldn't do it anymore, so it just got handed to a builder, whatever down the street here.
Yeah.
It wouldn't look like that, would it?
No.
So like it wouldn't. and you might argue that it would be so far removed from what we've actually ended up with there that like the architecture is yet to come. So you've built the model, but the architecture isn't there yet, sort of.
Yeah, yeah. But you're not really taught to detail in architecture school, so you wouldn't know.
Well, okay.
You are a bit. Though.
Hey,
jest.
this is architecture school. But the point I'm trying to drill down on is that the when you're making that shape that's sitting behind us, say for the bathroom, you're anticipating that all of that stuff that's going to go on with the doors and the way that the hinge works and the way the locks and the way the mirrors work, like that, that doesn't exist yet. Like, but you kind of know that something like that's coming. Is that right or what?
Yeah, it is. But I've talked about this before, and you've disagreed. You know, I've kind of got these systems in the background that allow me to work within a sort of a framework.
But how do they exist though? Because they don't exist as real things yet. They just exist as like I want to say like a dream space, but but there's this anticipation that those things will occur. Like when a really good footballer runs out onto the ground, they're an amazing footballer, but they haven't scored the goal yet. They haven't, but there's this anticipation that once they're out in the field for long enough, magic will happen. Yeah. So I'm just trying to unpack that moment a little bit, because you're doing it with a lot of confidence, aren't you? That like most architects would be, I want to say most architects, maybe architecture school makes architects be ahead of themselves. So they draw all of that kind of stuff. They draw, like in the football analogy, they're drawing out how they're going to run down the side and when you're going to pass it, and and they're going to try and automate that to the point that there is no free space. There's no way to move. But you're not trapped by that, really, are you? In fact, when you're doing the architecture model, that's really just to get the ball rolling, isn't it? I mean, is that 5 or 10% of the architecture at that point? How much percent
50,
of the architecture?
50%.
50%. You
just
reckon?
In the model, just in 1 hour's work is 50%.
That means that if I went down and I took that model down to Builder B and said, go make the bathhouse, do you think that 50% of the architecture would exist after Builder B is finished with it?
Because the bulk part of the architecture is the plan, the roof form or the shadow or the volume, and that's all captured within the model.
That's interesting. I mean, how much of that room, if I halve the size of it, or if I double the size of it, or I change the shape from a wedge to a square or even a circle, how much of the architecture do you think would change?
All of it.
You reckon? All of it? But what about all the details? All of the way that
nothing. That's just embellishment. That's just the way I sing. So all the architecture is there. I've mapped out all the spaces in a little plan that's on the piece of cardboard as I'm building the model. I've gone, I've got a little sketch, a tiny sketch, that might only be that big, that just has sink, toilet, bench, shower, and a bath. Then on a piece of cardboard, I'll just map those things out, and we all know what the dimensions are for them to be comfortable. It had this kind of concept that it would lead out to the corner view. And the corner would open, therefore you needed the shade on the building at that corner, so that triangle went out further than the other triangle. I wanted it to be a comfortable height, so it wasn't too big, so it's actually a really low building. I think it's 2,400. Yeah, it's probably only 2,400.
That doesn't, that's not describing the magic. That's not magical.
No, it's not magical at all.
That's plotter. That's left fullback
That's totally
stuff.
That's totally what architecture is.
Is the plod?
Yeah, it is, to get to a certain point. And and that's why for me architecture detailing is so important. That's when it gets exciting.
But isn't the plod? The plod's the easy bit, isn't it? That's you strapping your boots on.
That's just being a human being.
Yeah, it's being aware of.
Around, 2 arms,
but
2 legs.
There's some rules. There's some rules, but there's some basic rules, and and a reasonable architect is in control of those in terms of where the light is and stuff.
Yeah, we all know that, don't we? Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
A lot of architects know that. A lot of architects know that. I mean, the general population kind of knows it occasionally, but all of the other stuff that's there in terms of like the way that just the door works. like you're saying before, you kind of want to get into the territory of making new things. Well, the door's a new thing, isn't it? Like, I imagine that there's in the world at the moment, or in the history of the world, there's probably been doors which is, some would be close to that. But that's sort of, that's a unique door. And if I went down the street here, we were talking about Clarendon Homes before and so on, and I went to the bathroom door, that bathroom door is one of millions of doors.
Yeah. But it's just a simple way of, and I also see it in writing. There's, the use of grammar, can just bring something completely alive. And so you're just a master of the semicolon. Just kind of, dot, and a word, and then some other bits, and and that's just a skill that.
But wouldn't you think that like the door is more the architecture than the model?
No, it's just its dress.
It's just its dress.
Yeah,
just the colours.
So what? I mean, it's its colour. It's the way that it's decorated.
If that's the way it's decorated, then why not just use Mr. Stock Standard?
Because this is prettier.
I thought it was just the dress.
Yeah, dresses are either pretty or not pretty.
No one wants to wear an ugly dress.
Exactly. So, but
you would understand that, like for someone, myself and these people and Simon and everyone, that like the thing that they really appreciate about going into the bathroom isn't. I don't think it's necessarily its shape, although it's part of it. It's actually the way that the thing works, and the way that the reflections work, and just the mechanics of the room, the way it opens up, and all that sort of thing. That's the magic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's not the dress, is it? It's the magic.
Well, why can't the dress be magic? Like
you're turning this thing around. I'm glad that we've got this finally on record. Drew trying to diminish what his contribution to the world is. But the reason I'm picking up on this, apart from the fact it's recorded and stuff like that, is that you started off by quite confidently saying that the architecture was this model, and then everything that follows that was just like a bit of trimming and lace work.
Yeah.
Where
still saying it.
It's exactly the opposite. The bit of trim kind of exists. Although it's interesting to hear about the writing. I think that's kind of interesting there. But the magic is actually slowly appearing. And we've had a chance to talk to Simon about the time and how this thing kind of works. But at what point do you know that it will look like that? Or what point do you know that the door operates like that? Or like seriously, what's the point at which you go, oh, okay, this is the way it works? Because if I look at it now, it exists. So at some point, it must have known its existence at some point.
When I built the model.
Right, okay. But in the model, it doesn't exist. But in your imagination, the anticipation, you might say. Yeah.
In my imagination, I've got a blurry image of the finished object.
Okay, that's interesting.
And so, I imagine if I had to and it's me just unpacking my imagination and being the technician.
So when you're imagining that, are you literally imagining what we're kind of seeing at the moment, or is that?
Yeah, I'm imagining light and pattern.
Yeah. Hey, I'm in agreement. So I think that's probably what you are seeing.
Yeah. And so, what's translucent, what has things you can touch, what has grounding things, what has a back and a front, and what has surprise, and all the kind of the options for how that might unpack.
Are those part of the discussion, Simon, at the model point?
No, not a model point.
He's keeping that from you. But are you aware of the anticipation that are you aware of what might follow at that point?
Yeah, I am, but I'm probably not a normal client.
You've been to a previous houses of mine.
I've seen some of Drew's work before.
Sure. So we've kind of got across, like you kind of know what's there. Trust, the word trust came up a couple of times. Yeah. So, but you're kind of aware of that when Drew's talking about the bathhouse and he's got a shape and concrete roof and you're looking at a cardboard model, kind of aware that there's other things there that aren't in that model yet that will appear or not, or.
Yeah, I think so. Conceptually, we knew what was happening. So we knew the bath was, to Drew's point, we knew that the bath was there and there was a shower and a toilet.
Yep.
the detail of how that fitted
In an
together.
organisational sort of sense.
Yeah, we didn't really know. And I think we talked about enclosure. We had lots of ideas and lots of ways of executing. We didn't really talk about it, really, did we?
The funny thing was, and I think the description of it with me always describing it as a bathhouse was my way of informing the client that it possibly might be outside.
Yep.
And it wouldn't be enclosed, because bathhouses are not enclosed generally, in the kind of the Japanese sense that Simon and I have both experienced in our travels, that I know he has and he knows I have. And so when you say bathhouse, there's kind of connotations of where it might go. It'll be a landscape-based view from a bath type thing.
Even in your initial description, I thought that was interesting, that, I've got a shed and we're just after, the basics here. We've just got a couple of bedrooms and a bathhouse.
Yeah.
So the bathhouse is...
It's watch out. It's like alarm bells.
Yeah, that's right. It's not like we can fashion part of the kitchen to sort of be a place where you can have a shower.
Yeah.
It was never the outdoor dunny.
Yeah.
Was that?
No, conceptually, I knew what was coming. The detail was a surprise along the way.
Yeah.
But again, I didn't ask. I don't think at any stage would I consistently say, how's this thing going to look? Or I just knew not to.
Yeah.
But again, we're talking about the client. She always wanted to know what it was going to be.
Yeah. Oh, and the world is a bit like that. When we're talking about, the world wants to know what you're going to do before you do it.
Correct.
And it's not always the best way, which is the most interesting thing. And I would argue that the architecture of that room, the complete architecture of the room, is a function of its process, as much as it is anything you may have held onto with the model or something. It's actually been made by this long process of editing, actually, like doing something, looking, molding, trying, using all your experience in other places, bringing them in, twisting, turning. And you're working on other projects as well. And that's also then when, you're coming back to this one, you're seeing it in a different way because, your mind...
Luxury.
Yeah. So I think all of that is just really interesting. And it makes this really wonderful room, which is still not finished. Like, it's not... Like, I don't mean that in a cruel way. I mean that it's still not ready to give itself up and say, this is all I've got for you,
And so, I'll add one thing to it, is that... like the soccer player or the football player, the first move here, was to the first things we built were the corner opening doors. And so I'm always kind of trying to leave space above a door or window because I like that to be continuous, and I like the roof to float, and I like a bit of a fluffy area in the top there. And I like to try and do doors and objects that you can reach, like only at reachable height. So you have to be able to touch them. And so these things are at that height. And so the first move for the building, and it's a series of maneuvers, is obviously to open up the corner because it's the bathhouse, and they're privacy screens, as much as they are kind of being able to close it. And so that's like, the football player who's, just started to run down the field, like the next move, might be the sort of the shower and kind of enclose those things and then try and open. And that's, so things might become, that's a weave, and then the next kind of move as things become more elaborate, as other kind of strange footsteps, and then it's like the whole ensemble is just like that effortless kind of, kick at goal. So that would be my response to the technique of, playing well. The thing that I'd be kind of interested in asking, what do you think I'm going to do next here? That is the key move. It's the final move, like to put the bathhouse, to finish it. There's 30% more, power, oomph, magic to go, all in one thing. And so what is it? Like, what am I going to do next? Because to me, it's like, that's kind of the magic, and I wonder what you think it is. I mean, I would have thought it was obvious, but I mean, that's the sort of thing. And so, I mean, the next thing is
the outside.
Yeah, it's the landscaping around it. And so the whole thing is set up to be landscaped. So, and it's the thing that's come to last and is not the architecture. And so the plan, of course, is to do, and what I want to do is a kind of a clumped bush grass sort of landscape that just dot dashes all around the kind of the front here, and it gives controls the privacy through being either prickly or intractable, changes the relationship between this building and that and the hill beyond, so we can bring it all together with a kind of a landscape, and then colour and movement. And so, when you're in the bath, when you're in this kind of part of the building, there'll be different, whether it's going to be some grevilleas or some, tall grasses. So the whole thing is set to be animated by the landscape, which is the final move, which is the magic of that will finish it. Whether or not I finish that top pivot door there and build some more slats or do whatever, or do a really fancy door handle, kind of won't matter after that. I will anyway. But that kind of landscape thing, that's what we're all waiting for. That's what I'm waiting for, because you could think it was finished like this, but in no way is it.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's kind of obvious. And waiting on landscape, it could be another 10 years.
Yeah, or a couple of years.
Of years.
At least 5.
5 years.
Yeah.
And at that point, all the materials would have aged a little bit. Not in any. Yeah. They don't look like they'd be that much different, but that will be part of it as well, isn't it? Like usage will be part of it as well. Because that's the interesting thing about a concrete bench is that it takes its use. It wears its use really, and I think those marks are kind of interesting.
But I'm also I'm doing some benches at the moment that have another brass layer on top of that. So there's always adjustment to be made to a building over time, and if you don't piss the client off, you can always get back, and and have another go. Why? And just adjust.
Is it something you do by stealth? Do you wait till they go on holidays and then you just break in and do it?
Stuff like that, where I've made a couple of, in the past, I made a similar rainwater spout like that out of fiberglass and glassed it all. It took me like a year to kind of make it, once every month for a few hours. And then I just sort of, kind of snuck up and sort of installed it and took down something from there and put the thing back up. And it had taken forever to do. But Simon knows I'm always, I've turned up with something today, this kind of concrete bench that there's leftover concrete at another job. And we were going to do a timber bench on the kitchen thing at the front there. And I kind of thought, that's really boring, this kind of, piece of wood. And then we started about doing a fiberglass one or a carbon fiber one. And I'm doing some black concreting at the moment down at the other job. And I thought, let's just make a concrete bench, because we're pumping out tons of concrete every kind of couple of weeks. So I've made this sort of black bench. And that's sort of by stealth, something I've prepared somewhere else. And we, it's a kind of a,
You can move the heater when I'm not
here. Why, you want to move it? No. But then,
why do you? It's okay.
Yeah.
Why do you?
Do that.
Yeah, that's right. Why do you think it's so important, like to even when something is seemingly finished, like, or it's been given over to them to use and stuff? Do you think it still needs work?
Well, because I'm fully into architecture.
True.
And so if you see
but the architecture there is more than just the thing, isn't it? Isn't it like it's everything, isn't it? Like, isn't it like when you're saying, because you're into architecture, you're into the reason why you'd come back and replace the rain hood or the bench or something like that is because it's still alive or something. It still needs tending or something, maybe,
in
or
the most
thought.
Poetic way, like the building gives me things, and so I'll give it things back, and whether I come and see something that I just kind of see, a moment or a phenomena that's occurred, that's a gift from the building. And so, I might as well come back and, if I've got a bit of oil in the car and it needs a little bit of polish,
sure,
down here, or there's some object, or, I might be thinking about the door handles and I'm working on something else and finally realize how to resolve locking them. And then I'll just make another one on what I'm making there at another place, because all my details, they're like a big family. of particular one-off details, but they're very much related to what I've done before. Like they're on a kind of a path of just trying to remove themselves from the everyday, trying to be very much about expressing their material, their function, their movement, and their touch, and what they're made of. So that's really important. That's why all the doors have handles like they do, and why everything you can kind of get your fingers into and climb it and attach yourself to it.
That seems to be like a bit of a solution. Like I've seen that kind of detail on a lot of on other houses and places that you've been. Not exactly the same, but kind of like, is that because you've reached a way of doing that seems to work, and so you keep employing it? Like how does that work? How do the door handles work?
I mean,
like as an evolution.
Yeah. I love designing from the raw material. Like I'm still back to that, palette of like 5 materials. And so, I then just choose the material as the prime material and then start designing an object around it. And so it's kind of like an industrial design process, highly based on its function, trying to make the object look beautiful. The amateur sculptor, is hopefully alive in all of us. And then, some of the details, they get more, they become, the SLX 5000, because they've got bits of leather and bits of brass, and that's all just budget driven, so that I know when to kind of pull back and stop, and not just say, well, this is going to have everything. And I do enjoy adding all those parts, but, sometimes whether they're necessary or not, I don't know, do you kind of divide everything up into, multiple paragraphs, or do you just kind of slop it down all on one page? Still reads well, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Just different techniques for going about it. So,
but you wouldn't. I mean, like sometimes you would just go down to Bunnings and get a door handle, perhaps.
I never would.
No. Okay.
Like never.
Why? And why would that be?
So, I mean, I grew up working in timber and hardware stores. I started in like a hardware store when I was about 14 or 15. And so I know every component that's within those places and how they operate and what they do. And I've built, one of my first projects was this library up in the Blue Mountains. And it was a good timber yard, so we had a great resource of timber. But I used every piece of hardware within the hardware store to fabricate everything. So they didn't have pivot door fittings, and this could be the origins of sort of the pivot door fitting. And so I just made these kind of, bolted and sleeved. I'd find the right length of pipe, and I'd have kind of bolts top and bottom just to try and make pivots that adjust. And so I was kind of making pivots out of necessity. And Australia has a great history of make do, and I kind of grew up in a bit of that make do world where we don't have that, so we'll just make it out of something or other, and I was quite inspired by that. And I also, and something I love to talk about is I love humor in architecture, and so I love some of that kind of make do stuff where they're really quite amusing, where people have made something out of nothing, and you just kind of go, is that like like the leg of a sort of a combine harvester or something or other? And you go, yeah, well, it is. Yeah, it's fantastic. It's now kind of a door handle or something or other. And so I like that, but it's more on it's sort of like a humorous and playful. I wonder if people will catch me if I've done that. I can see, get away with this. So I used to do more of that, but now I'm trying to get the things to last longer and perform better. Don't squeak, do all the kind of stuff that make do stuff generally doesn't. It always has some, weird thing that it does, that it's, just kind of swings open by itself, or, makes a kind of squeaky noise. So that's a bit of an experiment in the kind of the details that I'm working on.
Okay.